Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig. My guest today is evangelical about his faith, sort of. He's not really seeking converts, he's seeking understanding. He's seeking to set the record straight. My guest today is Iftikhar Shaudry from Lone Oak. He is a Muslim, an engineer at ISP in Calvert City, and University of Alabama graduate?
Yes.
Roll Tide, right?
Roll Tide, absolutely.
Probably shouldn't say that in Kentucky. So you've been traveling Western Kentucky, putting on presentations to various groups. Just explain to us, just basically give us your presentation when you go in.
Okay, well, what I talk about is what Islam is, because of course after 9/11 there has been a lot of media coverage of what it is, and a lot of it is not quite right. So in the early stages before 9/11, I used to make the presentation because when we moved here in 95, we were probably the first Muslim family here. My kids were the first Muslims in their classes, only Muslims in their classes. So I would go and talk to Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and middle school and elementary school and things like that.
And your kids grew up in the Lone Oak
In the Lone Oak
schools?
area, from first grade on for my daughter. She graduated from Lone Oak High School in 2007.
And tell us where she is now.
Right now she's in Columbia, New York. She's graduating this May.
And majoring in?
She's majoring in what's called ELAC, East Asian Language and Culture, but her minor is pre-med, so we'll see how all that goes.
Columbia University.
Columbia
Excellent
University.
School.
She's
Excellent.
a very hardworking student. You can imagine with those two diverse curricula, she's taking lots of classes, 20 plus
Absolutely.
hours every semester. So
Absolutely.
she's doing awesome.
So,
And then my son went also from actually kindergarten all the way through Lone Oak High School system.
excellent. So, again, you're right. After 9/11, all of this stuff comes out, and an awful lot of it is untrue,
Right.
patently false.
Yes.
So, how do you, again, going back to your program, what do you do?
Well, I have a PowerPoint presentation that I put up, depending on the audience. Like if I'm talking to school kids or church Sunday school or something like that, then I have more geared towards them. If it's adults, then of course I have a slightly different presentation. But basically, it's what Islam is. Try to explain to them, because most people in this area have not met very many Muslims, or if they have met some, they are not close enough, most of them, to really know. What I feel very strongly is that if people would know what the religion is, and would people actually know us, they would have probably a different opinion of us, because we are just like everybody else. I have the fortunate of my wife, who has been my wife for 31 years. She's a Catholic, and I have a sister-in-law that's the Jewish faith. So my kids, even though they were raised Muslims, they also learned about Christianity and Judaism. So in that way, my kids are very lucky to have learned all that. But again, focusing on Islam, basically, it's a religion that came through Abraham. I know a lot of people know that, in the sense that Abraham through Isaac came the Judaism and Christianity, and through Abraham, through Ishmael, came Islam, through Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He was born in 571 AD in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. His father passed away before he was born, and then his mother died when he was 6. So he was raised by his grandfather and then by his uncle. Yeah. One of the reasons actually orphans have a very special place in Islam is because our Prophet was that. And he got his revelation at age 40, and then he died at age 63. The fundamentals are, there are 5 pillars, we call them pillars. The first and the foremost is that we believe in one God. It's the same God of Abraham and Jesus and Moses and all the Old Testament prophets. And
didn't he receive the revelation from the angel Gabriel?
Yes, he received, absolutely, yes. Received through angel Gabriel. It started in a cave. Actually, my son and I, when we went for Hajj, when he turned 16, I took my son for Hajj, and we actually, he went all the way into the cave. It's a little high for me. It's quite a climb. And so I didn't make it there, but I waited for him down the bottom of the hill. And so it's quite a thing there that he was meditating there when he got the revelation. And
So the 5 pillars. The
Yes.
first one obviously
is one God, believe
and
in
that
one
would be
God.
the same as a Christian or a Jew would believe the
It's the
same
same
thing.
God.
It's a monotheistic religion.
It's a monotheistic religion. It's the God that we believe in Quran, that it says that he created the universe in 6 days. Now we don't say anything about him resting on the 7th, but we believe God doesn't have to rest, but that's a minor point. He created Adam and Eve, just like it's in Christianity. And then, of course, he had all these prophets, like our major prophets are Adam, Noah, then you have Abraham, you have Moses, you have Jesus, and then, of course, Muhammad being the last prophet. The second pillar is praying 5 times a day, and it starts from dawn on the way to the time you go to bed, essentially at different times. And then the third pillar is fasting the month of Ramadan. And there from dawn till sunset, basically you don't drink or eat anything. And
What does the month of Ramadan, it sort of rotates, it moves?
it moves, yes, because Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar. So it's a 355 days a year, which means it's moving up 10 days every year. In fact, this time the fasting is probably going to start more like early August. And of course, as it keeps moving up, I have experienced where Ramadan started in summer, where you can imagine with Eastern Daylight Saving Time, it's a very, very long day, and then when it's winter, it's somewhat shorter. And so you fast that month. That's the month Quran was revealed throughout, not in one month in one time. It was revealed over a 23-year period, but this is the time it was revealed, so we fast that month. Of course, there is the other aspect of fasting, so you can learn the empathy with the poor and self-control and things like that. Then the fourth pillar is paying what we call is the zakat, which is a poor tax. You pay 2.5% of your assets, not your income, of your assets. So it's really regressive towards the older people, because as you get older, you are gaining more assets, and that's when you pay more. As you are young, you don't have as much asset, you pay less. But it's 2.5% of it, other than your home.
Sounds similar to tithing.
Similar to tithing, exactly. And then the fifth pillar is doing the pilgrimage once in your lifetime to Mecca. Now, that is a voluntary pillar in the sense that only if you can afford it financially and if you're physically healthy, then you do that once in a lifetime. There is a good story on that, is that Malcolm X, he was a Muslim, converted Muslim. Before he went for Hajj, he was a very radical and very anti-white. I guess he had his reasons why he wanted to be that way. But when he went to Hajj and he saw all these people from all over the world, like in 2010, there were 4 million people. When my son and I went, there was almost 4 million people. All over the world, from all different financial conditions, all different ethnicity, and they're all treated the same. And so when he came back, he actually renounced violence against the whites, because he realized that Islam really isn't a violent religion. So that's the fifth pillar. One thing on the pillar about fasting, now there is exemption for health reasons. If you have obviously health reasons where you cannot fast for that period of time by endangering your health, such as diabetes or something like that, then obviously you don't fast. So those are the 5 pillars. On the prayer side, there is one thing that even though we pray 5 times a day, Friday noon prayer is similar to church service on Sunday, essentially. That's when people like to go to the mosque and say the prayer there. But if you can't, obviously you don't. But that's a special prayer amongst all the prayers you do, is the Friday noon prayer. Yes.
Well, now, the religious service itself, obviously in the Christian church, there would be 2 or 3 hymns, a sermon, that sort of thing. So what would a Muslim worship service be like?
Okay, basically it's a prayer, and depending on which one, like in the morning it's different than at noon, then in the afternoon, then evening, and then at night. But one thing that's common in all the prayers, which is you recite the first surah, and in every prayer, it doesn't matter whether you are a Shia or a Sunni Muslim, you still recite exactly the same prayer, and then you recite another prayer from Quran. The Quran has 114, what do you call them, surah, which is like
A verse?
There are more than verses. Each
books.
surah,
Like a book
is
of the
divided
Bible.
into 114 chapters, if you want to call
Right,
it that. In
right.
Arabic, we call them surah. And the chapters can be long or short. The longest one, I think, is 286 verses, and the shortest one is 3. So obviously, during prayers, people like to recite the short ones because you have to recite one. You don't have to recite a particular one, other than the first one, and which goes into oneness of God and His power and His mercy, and we ask for Him to forgive us and show us the straight path. And then there is no sermon other than the Friday prayer. There is a sermon. Now, in terms of the sects, like the Sunnis, there is no hierarchy. Like in Christianity, you might want to consider, it's not quite the same, but Shiites is something similar to Catholicism in the sense that there is hierarchy in their churches. And that's how you hear the name Ayatollah, for example, in Iran, who is one of the supreme leaders from religious standpoint. In Sunni, there is no such thing. Every mosque has its own leaders, and every person is to himself. So there is some difference there in a sense. So in terms of sermon, Friday noon sermon is the big thing, and that's what you see on television, for example, because people go to the mosque for Friday prayer, that make an honest effort to go there, and therefore you have this big audience that the preachers can talk to. And that's why you see all these political movements taking place essentially after the noon prayer Friday. You see that.
I think one of the key differences between Muhammad and Jesus is that Muslims do not consider Muhammad to be divine. He's the last prophet, correct?
He's the last prophet on a line of prophets.
Right.
And as I mentioned, all the Old Testament prophets are also prophets. The Quran has the stories of the Old Testament as a part of Quran. But there are some very special prophets, such as Moses. He's mentioned the most number of times in Quran, much more than, say, Prophet Muhammad is. So is Jesus, so is Noah, so is Abraham. In Quran, there are chapters that are named after like Mary and some of the Old Testament prophets, Abraham. One difference is that we consider Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as another human being,
Right.
essentially. And a big difference with Christianity is that we consider Jesus as one of the great prophets, but we don't consider him a son of God. Just
Correct.
like we think.
So again, in the Christian faith, Jesus is divine. He's
Right.
the Son of God, but Muhammad is not a divine.
Right. Nobody other than God. We say God is only one. That's
Right.
it. He doesn't
Right.
have any
Right.
partners, sons, anything like that.
Explain, if you would, the difference between a Shia and a Sunni Muslim. I think a lot of people get confused about the history, how that came about, and who they are.
Okay. I'm not very well versed on it, but I can tell you I'm just basically a Muslim, not a religious theologian. But Sunnis are by far the majority among the Muslims. There's like 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today. A small fraction of that would be Shiites. Primarily, they're all Sunnis. The Shiites started from after Prophet died. There was 4 caliphs in a row, which are the rulers, Islamic rulers, that came about. By the way, they were not hereditary. They didn't pass on from father to son. Those were oligarchy in the sense the elders elected them. And one of the caliph, which is the last caliph, Ali, his followers, in a sense, thought that he should have been the first or the second caliph. Nonetheless, when he became the 4th caliph, and after each one of them, the subsequent caliph came on, there was a movement by others to get him off power. And it really culminated in his sons. He had 2 sons, Hassan and Hussein, when this became very, very severe to where actually Muslims fought with each other. And it so happened in Iraq, where then the bigger group of Muslims cornered, which are the 2 grandsons of Prophet, by the way, cornered them. And of course, the youngest was killed. He was first isolated, deprived of water and things like that, and then he was killed. And that's where the Shia sect started with them. And that's why their shrines are very prominent in Shia faith. And it's There is significant population in Iraq, a majority are Shia. So is in Iran. There are significant minorities of Shias in other places too, like Pakistan and even in Saudi Arabia, there is a minority of Shiites. There are other smaller countries where there are some Shiites, but predominantly that's a much smaller sect. But they believe in hierarchy in that sense, and therefore they have supreme leaders in their way of thinking. It's still the same religion. They still read the same Quran. They still pray the same way. They still pray to the same God, same prophet. It's just they believe that the hierarchy should have been different, coming down, and they have a little bit different idea of how things are going to end near the end. So
I suppose it'd be maybe a little like Catholics and Protestants and Orthodox Christians. They're all Christians, but just different types.
Sure, absolutely, yes, yes.
What is the most often asked question when you come in? I mean,
what is surprising to people, which totally floors me, one of the reasons I like to do this kind of presentations is most people don't even have the idea that it actually came from Abraham, that all three religions came through Abraham. And so that's one of the questions I get asked. How is that? And so, of course, when I go through the explanation and they can see that, lately the things they have asked are, if it's an adult group, things about like Sharia law, they hear a lot about it, rights of women.
well, explain that to me. What is that? You're right.
Okay.
That's a buzzword. You hear it all
Yes.
the time. What exactly is that all about?
Okay. Sharia law is the law that was practiced by the Prophet in his time. Now, certain things of that are still prevalent, such as property rights. One of the interesting facts that most people don't know or don't realize that now, if you think about Islam, you were talking about 610, 611 time frame on. Islam gave more rights to women those days than anybody else in the world had at that time. Women had property rights. So at that time, it was fixed for example, when you got married, you actually decided on what is called kabin, K-A-B-I-N. You decided how much you're going to pay if you ever get divorced. You paid that amount to the wife even during the marriage, and she doesn't have to use it for household expenses. It's her money. She gets to keep it. And so those are the kind of rights women had those days. And the property laws still continue. Like in Bangladesh, for example, where I'm from, if a Muslim passed away without a will, then his property would be divided by the Sharia law, where it says a son gets so much, a daughter gets so much, a wife gets so much, and all that. It's prescribed, and that tradition continues. But in the same token, in Bangladesh, if a Hindu dies, for example, which is about 15% of the Bangladesh population, or a Christian, which is a smaller majority, dies, their properties are divided by their own religious law. In other words, Islamic property laws are not imposed on other religious people living in the country under Islam. So that part still exists. The social part is different in different countries. Some countries have basically distorted it, mostly due to lack of education, lack of understanding, extremism, things like that. And so some of the things people say are Sharia laws are not really Sharia laws. And again, it's a distortion, depends, and that depends on country to country, to what extent those things are put in practice. But the economic side of it is pretty much prevalent in almost all Muslim countries, including India, which is actually a secular country, but there's a vast majority. They, I think, have the third largest Muslim population in the world. Their Muslims' property laws are Sharia laws when it comes to properties.
Well, I think the thing about Islam is the same as all faiths, and it's not monolithic. There are people who are more devout than others. That's true of Christianity, that's true of Judaism, it's true of Islam. I think Americans tend to see this as this monolithic religion, and it isn't any more than Christianity is or Judaism. Do you run into that all Muslims think the same and they're all the same?
Yes, and there's several things. As you had asked me, the other question I get, another buzzword is jihad. And here, I mean, everybody's ear perks up when somebody asks that question. Now, what is that? Actually, jihad is really a fight against yourself, in the sense that Prophet used to say that we as humans have more tendency to go astray. And so this is a struggle with yourself to not go astray. Our tendency, our natural tendency is to do things that we are not supposed to do. And so how do you control yourself? So you really fight with yourself, with your inner self, to control that. That is the biggest jihad. Other thing people think is suicide is okay in Islam. It's not. In fact, in Quran, there are specific verses that says, if you commit suicide, you go to hell. I mean, that way it's similar to Catholicism.
Exactly.
As my wife, in that there is no excuse of that. If you do that, that's it. You are done. You're going to go to hell if you commit suicide. If you kill someone innocent, same thing, which is what suicide bombers are doing today. Actually, suicide bombers are killing more Muslims than Americans or non-Muslims, which a lot of people fail to realize that. So that's another question that people ask about. The women's right is another question people ask, because they see all these things about. A good example of where the women's right is, Prophet's first wife, Khadijah, when he was a young man, actually she employed him. She was a business owner, by the way. So if you think about, this is like 595 AD, a woman running a business, she is an employee that is very trustworthy, very smart. And so if you listen to the media today, you would think, wait a minute, is Muslim women running business? That's unthinkable. They just stay inside home, their husbands beat them or whatever. So she ran the business, and she's the one that proposed to him the marriage. That's another concept people have, is that we go and pick our women who I want to marry, and that's it. Not so. A woman can pick her husband too. And if our Prophet did that, if his wife did that, what other better example you have in terms of women's right than that? And yet, you don't get to see that. Another comment I hear is people say, how come, because after I make my presentation, obviously I'm speaking as a Muslim as I practice it, as I see it around me, and as you can see, we are by and large like anybody else. Majority Muslims are not extremists. So they would say, then how come, if you think all these things are being done by extremists, how come I don't hear Muslims protesting it? And I said that's because there is a media bias against this. There is a organization, it's called CAIR, Council of American Islamic Relationship. They have a website, CAIR.com. People can go there and see, after 9/11, there's like 68 pages of religious leaders that have condemned 9/11. You don't hear about it. When the British bombing took place, there is similar number of people, that Muslims, that condemned it, and you don't hear about it. It's almost like, I give the example, if you think about this, now President Carter, you may agree or disagree when he was president, his politics, but as an ex-president, he's one of the finest men, one of the finest Christian, or the finest human being. When he wrote the book about Palestine, Apartheid or Peace, he was castrated by this media organization, the whole country here. You don't hear about it. Now, if an ex-president cannot say something like that and get away with it, where he's saying, hey, there is something going on in Palestine, it's not one-sided Palestinian or Islamic issue, and you hear him being castrated for that, how do you think me or another Muslim would get an opportunity to even speak and get heard? So I tell people that, yeah, we do say extremists are wrong, and we protest their activities, and we have to struggle against them, and we have to win that struggle. There is actually a struggle in almost every Muslim countries going on between the small minority extremists and the majority moderates. It's going on in Bangladesh, it's going on everywhere. I took my kids and family in 2008 to visit. That's the first time my kids went there when they were kids. So they were basically grown-ups, and we had election in Bangladesh at that time, and it thrilled them to no end. The party that won by huge majority to where they could pass any they want is a secular party. Is a secular party that won that. There was an Islamic party that got beat badly. They were like third or fourth place in the election. So yes, but if you look at website news or something, you will hear their voice. Then the prime minister, who by the way is a female in Bangladesh, and the leader of the opposition is a female too in Bangladesh. If you listen to them, you don't hear what they're saying, you hear what the Islamic extremist guy is saying, because that's what makes news. And like I said, there's a natural bias against Muslims. So that's another question I get is, why don't we speak out? Yes, we do. You just don't hear it, because we don't have platform. And that's one thing I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience, because that is, it's like this, a small change. Maybe people that are listening to me, I'm not saying immediately take me at faith, but at least investigate yourself. Don't listen to what you hear. At least try to find out for yourself how much of it is true and how much it isn't. And you'll be surprised that we are no different. And if you know a Muslim, if you have a neighbor that's a Muslim, make an effort to know them. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I'm not saying all Muslims are good. Just like everybody else, we have bad Muslims, just like there are bad Christians and bad atheists or whatever. Nonetheless, by and large, we are just like you. We want the same thing for our children like you do. And those are the kind of things people tend to confuse sometimes because of all the bias. In fact, they would even ask me a question, how should I treat a Muslim? In fact, one of my slides is that. How do you treat a Muslim? And I say, no different than you would treat a neighbor. Now, there are some cultural differences, and people confuse culture with religion. An example I can tell you is, like, for example, in Bangladesh, it's very all right to go and visit your friend. Even though people have phone, you don't have to call him ahead of time and say, can I visit? You just walk in. Now, if he's having dinner or lunch or whatever, you just join him. It's perfectly all right. If you go there and he's not home, you go back. I mean, it's no big deal. Now, it's not a Muslim culture, it's a Bengali culture, which means that my Christian friend would do the same thing to me, my Hindu friend would do the same thing to me as I would do to him in that way. It's nothing to do with, and they're more common with Christians and Hindus of Bangladesh, with the Muslims of Bangladesh culturally, than a Christian of Bangladesh to a Christian of United States. And so sometimes people, the same thing goes with like the dresses people wear. People again confuse the culture with religion. Yes, we are asked to dress modestly. That's important. But then don't take something you see in one religion or one thing as being universally applicable. Right.
We are almost out of time. How could someone contact you if this person wanted you to give a presentation?
I'd love to give a presentation, and all they have to do is call. We are in the phone directory. I guess I could say that is 270-534-1318. Call us. We'll be glad to come and talk to your group. Again, the number is 270-534-1318. Just give us a call, and we'll stop by and.
So you've traveled. Where? Give us an example of some of the places you've gone.
Okay. Like this February, I actually made a presentation to United Methodist Church downtown. Last December, I made a presentation to Lourdes Hospital during their lunch break. I have been to quite a few of the churches here. I have been to the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. I have done that. So there is a program called Calling All Colors.
Yes.
When my kids were there, I made a presentation there.
I've had them on the program.
Yes,
so,
and I have been there, and I made a presentation to them.
And we'll have to stop. I don't want to be rude and cut you off, but he signaled me I must stop.
Okay.
Maybe you can come back in. We can talk some more later. This
no problem.
Would be very good.
Yes.
My guest today was Iftikhar Shaudry. I'm Barry Craig. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.